So, with all this talk of cultural appropriation and all this in the channel, and going back into the back catalogs of rock and roll and discussing the character acting and everything, I had actually, for about the past week and a half, been thinking about one character from rock and roll's heydays in particular. And it was kind of weird because then just yesterday, Fats Domino, we found out the news that Fats Domino unfortunately passed. Great artist, 89 years old, of course, and he lived a long, full life. But then I had been thinking about Little Richard, and wow, what a strange story I unearthed there. For some reason, it's strange, Little Richard, because Chuck Berry, of course, comes up again and again in the rock and roll story, and then you occasionally would hear of Fats Domino. I'm trying to say. I mean, I have a few vinyls from him. He passed through the lens. Sometimes when you're reading the story, he comes up. I mean, the Beatles and the Stones, they just come up repeatedly, but and Elvis, and you look at the '50s icons, but Little Richard was this really strange uh, character, and yeah, I don't know, it was just like a strange story, I thought, but it was, you could see really when you look at Little Richard. That's actually, I think, now that I've looked at it, I think he said that he created rock and roll. I mean, I found this great quote from Keith Richards, where he makes a comment and he says "Tutti Frutti," which sounds like a ridiculous name for a song, but all of rock and roll's early spirit is in that song. I mean, Keith Richards says "Tutti Frutti turned the world from monochrome to Technicolor," which is a great quote, and we're far beyond Technicolor now. You know what I'm saying? But that was where we were then in the 1950s when Little Richard comes out. Um, and you see, Little Richard is very intriguing because, first of all, he's a black icon who, again, though, like so many black icons from the past, is just totally forgotten in by the black community and by the white community, in my opinion, in the modern day. He actually kind of has nowhere to fall in terms of his legacy. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes, for instance, I try to describe with the Stones, I try to stress how Mick Jagger actually also is having some serious legacy problems, and I'll explain to you why. So when we, all right, well, before I explain to you that, I have to explain to you a band that I think doesn't have legacy problems. Excuse me. So Zeppelin and Robert Plant doesn't really have any, or is Ozzy Osbourne, and the reason is because a whole new movement, which is very clear to see, was born out of the Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin 70s style rock. And that movement is, of course, heavy metal and Pantera and Metallica. It's all very obvious, and they say it constantly themselves, that they owe everything that they created back to that seed that Ozzy Osbourne planted. I mean, if you look at Sabbath, they sang some great songs about wizards and fairies wearing boots and all this sort of stuff. And this magical beings that you really kind of see, this was picked up in heavy metal, I'm saying? This darkness and this magic world. And this was also from Zeppelin. They had the same thing going. But when you look at the Rolling Stones and you try to find their legacy and where it landed, what you're going to quickly find is that very few modern bands, if any at all, seem to even take anything from them. It's very strange for as famous as they were. For instance, Guns N' Roses was taking some pages from the Rolling Stones. Like if you listen to what's his name, Slash, give interviews, he'll always shout, "Oh, the Rolling Stones, man! I love the Rolling Stones." But when you start listening to newer bands, like you kind of look at, I'll give you a band who, what is that band that did She Talks to Angels? The Black Crowes. So the Black Crowes had an obvious Stones reference, but actually when you look at the Crowes, you see that they kind of just, in my opinion, they kind of dissipated. They didn't really grip audiences. They have that one song that comes on, rock radio constantly, which is a great fucking song. But they didn't stick around. No one really thinks, the Black Crowes, what I'm saying? My favorite band is the Black Crowes. I don't know. I've never heard anybody say that. So, my opinion is that Jagger's influence landed really more in Lady Gaga and in much of the female realm, actually, when you really look at Jagger, because he was a dancing frontman, and you just don't see any frontman in rock and roll who dances like Jagger anymore. All those people moved off into other other genres, which is the big fucking shame of it all. I don't want that to happen. I want those folks to stay in rock and roll, but they didn't. It just didn't. The influence didn't carry on. I honestly don't even think someone could walk out doing those moves like Jagger in this day and get any love. I think people would just be like, "What the hell's going on?" You know what I'm saying? They'd be confused. This guy belongs in another genre. And when we look at Little Richard, we see that this is an even more, what do you call it? it's even worse for Little Richard. His legacy seriously has nowhere to fall because, on the one hand, you look at his own community, which is the African American community, and they have just completely, they're on a whole different genre now, and have been basically. I mean, if you really look at it, they've basically been on a whole other genre and rejecting rock and roll since the '60s. African Americans were involved with rock and roll intimately in the 50s, and then all of a sudden in the 60s, whether they quit it themselves or whether it was quote unquote stolen, which I don't believe, but I don't really believe it was stolen. It's hard and ridiculous to believe for me. But then they just vanish from rock and roll and they go into all these other genres through the 60s, 70s till today. So if his legacy is not at all there in the African American community, what I'm saying? Like, you're not going to hear a rapper come out, I don't think. Even though they are, and I can make an easy argument that a Young Thug or something could easily be traced right back to Little Richard. But they're not going to say, oh yeah, Little Richard, man. It was like, that's like my, I was listening to him, and I could see it because they don't even see the line. Most modern artists. And then if you look at, so then you say, well, he's remembered in rock. But actually, he's not. And neither is really Elvis or anyone, like I say, because when you look at rock now, it has turned into this thing that is basically a heavy music. You see what I'm saying? So when you're looking at this heavy sort of masculine music now that's all associated with, like, I don't know, tough dudes, and you go, well, no one's looking back at Richard here in that sort of sense either. So this guy's legacy is just totally fallen out, and he's the guy who fucking basically, if you really look at it, it's really true. He created it. He gave rise to the whole thing. That was the first big crazy song. I mean, when you look at the videos of him doing Long Tall Sally, when you look at him doing what do you call it? Tutti Frutti, all the songs that he did. I can't name all of them. You know what I'm saying? But when you look at all the videos. It's just like mind-blowing because you're like, whoa, this was like, there was so much energy in his performances. I mean, I was watching one the other night, it was like, oh, Lucille, that's another one, yeah. It's just so much energy, just shouting at the top of his lungs in these performances, And it's like, you could see that. I think, they say James Brown inspired a lot of rock, but I don't think so. I think it was Little Richard, man, and he just is, and the flamboyance and everything. I mean, you look at Freddie Mercury; it was so obvious that he was taking so many pages from this guy. You look at David Bowie; he was taking so many pages, and it's like, and it's just totally, but now it's just all utterly forgotten, and it's really weird how that happens, isn't it? So I don't know. I just thought I would share that. Little Richard, dude, he was a great artist, still alive. It was so weird because then Fats Domino died, and Little Richard came out and gave a rare interview to Rolling Stone magazine, and I was like, I can't fucking believe this, because I was just thinking about him all week. So, ciao.